Hey everybody, welcome back to Soul School. We're joined with the one and only Ronnie Laws and getting a true education, and that's what this is really about. Matter of fact, before we get to your albums, how did you end up in Earth, Wind, and Fire? I'm just curious.
Well, when I moved to Los Angeles in 1970 actually, I was doing a lot of freelancing in LA and sessions and all of that, and I was playing with a pianist by the name of Doug Kahn.
Okay.
In fact, Gene Kahn's ex-husband.
Oh, okay.
And Gene was in the band at that time as well, and the word got out that Earth, Wind, and Fire was, auditioning and looking for, horn players. And interestingly, Doug said, well, I think Doug and Maurice White had some kind of a French, business relationship, and so Doug said, listen, man, you should take advantage of that. And I did. I went down and auditioned, and I was thinking, in my mind, I was going to be a part of a horn section, So after I auditioned for Maurice, and he came to the conclusion that he was just going to go with one horn player, which is very innovative because
it's you. Let me tell y'all something. That particular band of Earth, Wind, and Fire that he was in, I love All in All, Spirit, Way of the World, those albums with the big budget and all this and that. But to me, the stuff pre-Way of the World, Head to the Sky, Last Days and Times, that band, Roland Batista, Morningside High School drummer Ralph Johnson, and Jessica Cleese used to be with the Friends of Distinction, 5-octave range.
Right.
Unlike Minnie when she was with Rotary Connection, those kind of people, she could go up, down, all the stuff you hear that Diane Reeves and just the different grades to do. Jessica had all of that. And you bring in Ronnie Laws, and you got the vision of Maurice White, and then you got Reggie Andrews, who's the teacher over at over Locke High School. He brought you Patrice Rushen and all of them. That band of Earth, Wind, and Fire that you in was my favorite band, man.
Thank you very much.
What is it? Power, Time Is on Our Side. I'd Rather Have You.
Yeah.
Man, I wake up to I'd Rather Have You, man.
That's great. Yeah.
Man.
It was very innovative. Maurice was definitely an innovator. He had vision. But for me, it was, I developed a very closeness with all the guys, and it was like a family, and in particular with, with Larry Dunn, the keyboardist, I considered him like my little brother, we be on the road, and most of the time at that time we had to share rooms. He didn't have the luxury of having single rooms, but it was cool though because it drew a closeness. We became very close. I looked at Larry as I said, my little brother. I think Larry was only 17 years old when he was part of the group. I was 20, so
that group that y'all had, to me, y'all and New Birth, live band was the baddest two bands. I love Funkadelic, and I believe me, I know Tiki Fool and all them, but to me, New Birth, Robin Russell and them dudes, and y'all had the baddest two bands, hands down, of that time period. Now, how did you end up on Blue Note, man?
Well, what happened was, I remember we, Earth, Wind, and Fire, we were doing a showcase for the guy at Columbia.
Oh, Clive Davis, you talking about?
I'm being facetious right now.
Clive
Davis, he actually signed the group.
Yeah.
And it was at that stage that...
Oh, so he bought out the Warner Brothers contract.
That's for sure. Yeah, he did that, and it was a big thing. It was really an epic, point, for me in particular, because I had always made it sort of clear that eventually I've always had the the aspirations or the goal of being a solo artist. I never really felt 100% comfortable being a sideman.
Sure. Well, you're not a sideman. You did it well, but you listen to Fever, Pressure Sensitive, and Friends and Strangers and all. You're not a sideman.
But it was a great experience, though. All those things contributed to to where I am today, because I learned a lot of studio skills. Observing Maurice and that whole experience, man. It really gave me a good insight as to how to produce, studio production, and so I garnished a lot from that. I extracted a lot from from that experience. But when it came time to actually sign, as a part of the the group, I declined, and it wasn't an easy decision. It was a very difficult decision because at that particular time, my wife was pregnant with our first son, and economically, it was not, it was not the right time to make a decision like that. But I basically had to challenge myself, and say, well, okay, if you want to be a solo artist, then you're gonna have to, you have to own up to it. You have to dedicate yourself to that. So I would never forget the one of the big concerts after I left the group. They performed at the Palladium, Hollywood Palladium, and Herbie Hancock was the opening act. And actually, I didn't even have money to get into the show. Larry Dunn got me in, and my wife through the back door.
Wow.
So after the concert was over, most of the people had left, and I never forget my wife and I were just, I was in tears actually. I said, man, I wonder if I really made the right decision because, I'm looking at my wife, she's pregnant, I had no money, and so, but it's really interesting. It was something that really kicked in at that point, because I said, well, listen, I'm talking to myself, it was at that point I knew I had to make it. I knew I had to sort of really dedicate myself to being a solo artist, and so it was from that point that I decided to really, devote myself to to writing more, putting my group together, putting a demo and stuff together, and so I shopped around, and Donald Byrd, I had an appointment with George Butler at Blue Note. And he played my demo, and Donald Byrd just happened to be in the office at that time, and he commented after the listening session was over. He said, "Man, I've never heard a soprano play a sound like that."
Yeah.
He said, so he was really trying to nudge George to say, you should sign this guy.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the time, George was, he was, I think he was preoccupied with, the Blackbirds were really big, Donald Byrd, and so it was a lot going on, and so there was a little procrastination as far as indecisiveness on George's part to really sign me at that time, but there was another figurehead there, Eddie Levine, and he really pushed for me to get signed at Blue Note, and Donald Byrd had come to the point he was just so preoccupied, so busy with the Blackbird situation. I mean, he was, traveling. He invited me to his home, and trying to get me to, just to encourage me. But it just came to the point where he just realized, man, I really would like to get involved, and get you signed and produce you, but I just don't have the time. So,
man, you were so off the hook at that time when I started thinking about all of the name Ronnie Laws and Pressure really
right.
truly fits. We said that before, but when I sit back and I think about everything you just got through talking about, and then I think about even how that first album influenced a lot of different people because, Always There got recreated and,
right.
and retweaked by, of course, Augie Johnson and Side Effect and those cats. And then that Fever album, that was insane. And then Friends and Strangers, man, it all really, I think it all paid off.
It did. I mean, it did, and in the finish.
Even some of the later stuff that would come,
exactly.
the EMI stuff.
Exactly. So what happened was, when we came to the point of, trying to figure out who could get involved in the production, that's where Wayne Henderson's name came in, and George Butler was very excited because the Crusaders were, they were a hot group, at that time, and so, George, was encouraged by the fact that Wayne, wanted to be involved in production, and so it was thereafter that I signed my first deal with Blue Note, and as I say, the rest is history because that title, Pressure Sensitive, really was a culmination of all of that experience. That's what I came up with, that title, Pressure Sensitive. And so that it was a very fitting title for my first debut album.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know you got to get the sound check, but tell me about this new project before you get the sound check.
Well, the new project is basically a package with one of my favorite players, Tom Brown, and we had interacted over the years, but we never really got together and decided to really just put a package together and do live dates and so. I'd done a lot of packages, and to be very honest, I just wasn't too happy about, certain packages that I was, aligning myself with. And so I just came to the conclusion. I said, well, I'll just put my own package together. And one of the persons that I thought about was Tom Brown, because I remember during the the early '70s, and particularly when Jamaica Funk came out, and careers sort of parallel, like with Grover Washington and I. So it was only fitting, that it worked out this way. And I called Tom. I said, man, let's just sort of put our efforts together, and make this happen. And he said, yeah, man, let's do it. And so here we are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, I want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for educating me. The stories, I could sit up all day and I know you got to get the sound check, but hey, man, thanks, and thanks for your contribution. More important to my development, and there wouldn't be a Soul School if it wasn't for cats like yourself. I mean, for real, man. You, Isaac Hayes, all y'all cats, and we're losing.
Yeah.
So many of them, man. Like I said, I was talking to Tom about this earlier. My main man, Henry Davis, LTD, we were quite close. It's just a lot of different people. Jimmy Castor, we lose them all, but we still have a lot of greats. There's Gladys Knight, there's you. And matter of fact, like I say, we didn't even get a chance to talk about Deborah and Eloise and Hubert, but your brother will be coming up here, matter of fact, to San Francisco Yoshi's, I think, in a couple of weeks. And so I'm going to definitely try. I'm going to get on my hands and knees like, hey, look, I remember when you were playing the flute on Ironside. I know, man, please give me an interview. Mr. Laws, please give me an interview, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
My pleasure.
Thank you,
My
man.
pleasure.
And,
thank you so much, really.
Hey, man,
we
God
need,
bless.
what you're doing is so important, man, because it's to me, it's always been about preserving the legacy of our music. And I've always been, a big promoter of that, because that's what we pass down to our children. Is the legacy that's been set before them. And so what you're doing is preserving that, and as well as an educational aspect of what you're doing is so important, man. I mean, so I just want to applaud you, to keep doing what you're doing, man, because this is the one medium that we can use to educate, not only the young but the old as well, because like you were saying, a lot of of our fan base, they have maybe a shallow understanding of view of what we do, but when you sit down and do interviews like this, it gives them more of an in-depth understanding and appreciation, of what we do. The
honor was truly mine. Hey, let me stop shaking. Let's get.